How to be an artist. Step 38. Maybe you're an artist. Hello, friends. I've got an announcement to make. This is going to be the last episode of How to Be an Artist. Final episodes in podcasts are a little bit like superheroes dying. You know, you can always bring them back. This project's no different. If I want to restart it, I can do that anytime, but I've got no plans at this moment. I do, however, want to explain why I've come to this decision. And I'm going to tell you why while I draw this. How to be an artist. If you've listened to any of the episodes, you know that it's always been a very personal exploration. I had kind of this question I was trying to answer, this problem I was trying to figure out. And if you listened, you probably have an idea of some of the themes that matter to me. Just to kind of give a brief overview of how I got started. You know, I worked in video games. I made comics. And however much for me in that experience that I appreciate and that I grew and that I met amazing people, there was always something about working within those fields and the way that I did that was unsatisfying for me. So much so that, like, the peak of my professional career, when I published Green Monk, this thing that I had wanted to do for years and years, it was also like this low point in my life. And so I think in some ways, this project has been a process of figuring out why that was. I kind of feel like it's hard to describe, but for whatever reason, in my art career, I had created this prison for myself with how I defined being an artist that really limited what I could do and how I could express myself. Fast forward to the summer of 2019, and I had this experience on a meditation retreat that, for whatever reason, it seemed to like open the door of that cage. And it put me on the trail of something. Like, I suddenly had a sense that, like, okay, whatever's missing in my life, I feel like I have a sense of in what direction to go to find it. And I've kind of been on that trail ever since. I've been on the hunt for this thing that feels like, in some way, it's an answer to what I've been looking for. And How to Be an Artist has really documented much of this journey of trying to figure this out, answer this question, you know, hunt down this thing that I'm trying to find. You know, and there's a few themes I explored during this time. I looked at the experience of making art pretty closely. I looked at the process of self-discovery, the type of practices you do for self-discovery. I looked at community, how you build community, how community can shape what type of art we can make. And I touched on place and the possibilities that place opens up for us. You know, but most of all, this was about investigating what it meant for me to make art, like how I define that. And as I wrapped up the final episodes this fall, I started getting signs that it was time for the podcast to come to an end. You know, for one, I was sending out all of these invites to potential guests, and I wasn't getting any responses. But it wasn't just that. I mean, if I had like a passionate reason to move forward, I would have soldiered on either way. But I didn't. I could just kind of tell that, like, oh, my heart it was kind of not in the project anymore. It was starting to turn into other places. One of those places it was starting to turn towards was to actually making art again. I was finding myself really enjoying making art. If any of you have followed the podcast, you'll know that I mentioned that a lot in the podcast, that I went on hiatus with making art for a long, long time. And I found myself the end of last summer and fall sitting down and making art and just totally loving it, enjoying it, having a great time. So, and I also felt like, I kind of felt like I answered the question I was trying to answer. I was trying to kind of find this new definition of what it means to be an artist, what it means to make art. And I feel like I found a definition to that's satisfying for me. From the very beginning, the title of this podcast has been one of these things that is ironic for me, but also sincere. It's meant to be kind of a satire for how we have kind of like packaged and commodified art and teaching art into something that we think can be kind of replicated and distributed and like scaled out in some sort of way, like it's a box of Cheerios or something. And I had become really dissatisfied with that way of thinking about art and about marketing art. And so the title's kind of a satire on that, or an indictment of that. But it's also a very sincere title. It's also me kind of trying to explore how to be an artist, but find that for myself. Like, it's never meant to be didactic, like I'm trying to teach you, the viewer, how to be an artist. It was very much this question of me trying to figure out that process in a new, more enlightened, more sophisticated, more human way that really touched on what matters most to me as a person. So yes, I think I've got an answer that works for me, which is kind of a cool place to be. But I'm going to say right up front, like, I don't think this is the answer. And I don't think that it's not going to change. I think it's totally likely that it can change. But it's something that, like, makes sense to me right now. And more importantly, it's something that, like, gets me out of bed right now. It gets me excited to make art. So in this episode, this has all been an introduction so far, by the way. I hope you don't mind that. But I'm going to share something. I'm going to share an essay I wrote last fall called Maybe You're an Artist. And this is just kind of my expression about what I think it means to be an artist. And I hope you find some value in it, and I hope it lights you up too. And if it can help you get up out of bed, like, that's pretty awesome as well. Before I jump in, I just want to say, like, thank you for those of you that follow this podcast. Honestly, I know it's not a big demographic because I saw my numbers really drop from the stuff I was sharing on YouTube to what I shared on the podcast. But I really appreciate you, and I feel like, you're kindred spirits. Anyone that's willing to sit through the kind of weird intersection of the things that I am into, I think that's pretty cool, and you're the type of people I want to hang out with. So I'm ready for the next step. I hope it's something you're going to want to be part of, and it's something I'm going to share sometime pretty soon. And all I can say is, like, I'll let you know when I'm ready to share more about it, because if you're someone that has enjoyed how to be an artist, I think you're going to be interested in what I have to share. So thanks again, and without further ado, here is my essay, Maybe You're an Artist. I was recently introduced to Samuel Burya's concept of the live player. I was asked by Peter Lindbergh to do a series of illustrations for an essay he wrote on the topic, and the concept immediately resonated with me. You see, I've been going through a transitional phase in my life for the last few years, which has consisted of lots of self-evaluation and life review. Part of what I've been trying to sort out is why I have chosen to dedicate my life to art and what it means to be an artist. I've even been hosting a podcast for the past year, basically trying to understand the question. There are lots of ways to look at it, but one thing that was becoming clear to me was that being an artist is not as simple as getting good at making what we would conventionally define as art. I've spent most of my professional career primarily improving my skills as a draftsman. In other words, getting good at drawing. There are many artists I know who are passionate about this particular skill. They love to do it so much that even when they are not working, they're still drawing. It's not surprising that folks like these develop mind-blowing skills. However much I'd like to be one of these folks, I have to admit that ain't me. I like to draw, but I also get tired of it or even completely burn out at times. So what is it that has driven me to be an artist? As I've stopped to contemplate it, it's really about bringing something new into the world. Everything I've ever done, whether it has been music, film, comics, or some sort of civic engagement, has been about creating something that didn't exist previously, not far from how Burya describes a live player. And this is a quote from Burya. A live player is a person or well-coordinated group of people that is able to do things they have not done before. A dead player is a person or group of people that is working off a script, incapable of doing new things. You may notice that this says nothing about any particular skill. It doesn't require you to learn how to draw or paint or master the arpeggiator on your digital soundboard. It just requires that you depart from a script, do something unpredictable, and invent some new tricks that have not been tricked before. This means that you can be a live player in whatever domain you choose to occupy, not just those where we wear berets and live off of ramen noodles. You can be a live player accountant, a live player teacher, a live player sanitation worker, etc. One of my personal favorite live players is a civil engineer. This is in reference to Chuck Marone, who was my guest on How to Be an Artist, episode 33. I'd highly recommend you check it out. One of the most original thinkers that I follow. You may also notice that this says nothing about values. As Burya points out, authoritarian regimes, in this case, he kind of refers to Putin's Russia, authoritarian regimes are capable of being life players too. I think Nazi Germany at the early part of World War II certainly demonstrated some life player moves. Serial killers and mass murderers are also capable of being life players. Flying commercial jetliners into iconic financial buildings certainly fits within the definition. Live player moves can be used to attack enemies, oppress populations, and manipulate users. In short, it is possible to be a rivalrous live player. A live player who makes novel moves that benefit themselves but externalize costs. Read, screw over others. This gives me the opportunity to distill my favorite parts of the live player definition for my own purposes in defining what it means to be an artist. To be an artist, it's necessary but not sufficient to be a live player. For reasons I hope to soon make clear, an artist must also be non-rivalrous in the moves they make. To put it in more poetic terms, an artist must create new things in the service of beauty, truth, and love. To tie humans together in what Limburg calls life work, the artist must create the sacred. Again, you don't have to fit into the cliche of an artist for this to apply to you. I should even make it clear that this doesn't even have to fit into some sort of professional box. It can be about almost any decision you make as a human being. When you think about it, it can almost be overwhelming. How many decisions do we make throughout the course of our day that are determined by some sort of script or conditioning? That being the case, how can we possibly hope to move the needle in the right direction? First, I think it helps to see becoming an artist not as some sort of binary quality where you are either an artist or you're not, and rather conceive of it as existing on a spectrum. From this perspective, it is about incrementally increasing the moves you make that are free from scripts. But to really orient yourself correctly, it's helpful to know what is on the other end of the spectrum. According to Burya, the other end of the spectrum is being what he calls a dead player. But we have another term for this that I think we can all relate to: addiction. In this regard, I like Mark Lewis's definition of addiction. He describes addiction as a process of what he calls reciprocal narrowing. This basically means getting caught in a feedback loop of decision making where the options narrow with each iteration of the loop. Eventually, you end up in a position that we would all recognize as addiction. You keep returning back to the same choice over and over again because that is the only option that seems available. While we are all familiar with the stereotypical addict, I think this is an experience we can all relate to individually and collectively. It may have something to do with why zombie narratives are so popular. Dead player indeed. As Lewis describes it, when people fall into addiction, their environments shrink around them. Good friends, stable romantic partners, available loving family members, physical comforts, such as a safe place to live, job opportunities, and all the rest of it gradually become less available. The opportunities for getting them back also become less available. Our attention and motivation, riveted now to just one source of satisfaction, loses their connection with the other sources of satisfaction that normal people enjoy. I see this as a literal narrowing or shrinking of the environment. Because of what I've called now appeal, or simply habit strength, or deeply learned habitual behavioral patterns, we focus only on what's in front of us and forget how to go after other rewards. So other rewards fade in availability. They evaporate. They get lost. When I was an addict, I lost close friends. I lost a woman I loved. I lost the opportunity to communicate honestly with my parents. I lost money. I lost a sense of social and physical safety. I got kicked out of school and lost that opportunity for a while. And all the rest of it. The picture is typical, one way or another. End quote. So, this addiction art spectrum is useful because it allows us to see addiction and art both subtly and grossly. And I think I kind of need to just explain the term grossly there. This doesn't mean like gross, like a soggy sandwich. It means like kind of large and small. So subtle and gross are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. So it allows us to see addiction and art both subtly and grossly, and to measure our progress or regression as the case may be. We may not have a meth addiction, but we all likely have small compulsions and habits that limit our freedom. We may not all create civilization-altering masterpieces, but we may have small opportunities to do things here and there that open greater freedom for ourselves and others. That is the corollary of Lewis's model of addiction that is not captured in Burria's definition of the live player. The same process that moves us toward addiction can be run in reverse. And I think this is probably the most important point here. With each live player move we make, we open up further degrees of freedom. We increase our capacity for creativity. With time, our lives themselves become works of art. So for me, I just want to make a little bit of commentary here that I really think the important idea here is learning to kind of point our ship in the right direction. If we can kind of just get headed in the right direction, if we can start making some good choices, it just increases the likelihood that we're going to make more good choices in the future. So, and eventually, I think with time, what I've really experienced, it does come to a point, if you stick with it, that those choices, they build their own momentum if they're done correctly. So this is something I'm going to talk about in a future YouTube video. But anyway, continuing with the essay. Crucial to Lewis's model of addiction is the role that society and place play in this process. Those that start in situations of narrow options are more likely to fall into the feedback loop of reciprocal narrowing and addiction. This is why I like to define art as being non-rivalrous. It is not only about making live player moves that benefit ourselves or our team, but decalcifying a society and habitat that has become increasingly sclerotic with limitations and stifling scripts. It's why we must choose walkable city grids over suburban cul-de-sacs and civic engagement over social media. It is about becoming artists not just individually, but on increasing scales of human organization. It is about recognizing that we are part of an interconnected web of feedback loops. As Churchill once said, we shape our dwellings and afterwards our dwellings shape us. As our lives become masterpieces, they inevitably interconnect with our relationships and our environment, accelerating the likelihood of artistic opening outwards from the center and then feeding back into our own lives. It's like we improve our own lives, we make our own lives better, we become healthier, our environments are naturally just going to change as a result of that. Our friendships are going to get better, our relationships are going to get better, everything we touch is going to get better by making our own lives better. And that causes a feedback loop where now we have this environment that's better for ourselves to keep growing and keep getting better. And so it becomes this reciprocal thing, this kind of mutual improvement of ourselves and our environment. To move the needle then requires some introspection, yes, but necessarily we must also engage with others and find new ways to break out of our scripts. This is the imperative of our era. Monumental effort to demonstrate reason and evidence crashes up against lack of trust and tribalism. Unthinkable human potential is impeded by isolation and alienation. To find a way forward means finding new ways to connect and create. It's a challenge we are all entitled to take on in whatever opportunities are open to us. It doesn't require heroic sacrifice. It requires humble, creative, courageous work. It requires us in large and small ways to let go of addiction and become artists. So that's the essay. And I guess if it's not clear enough, I just want to make it very clear that being an artist is about how you live your life. It's about the choices that you make. It's about living life in a loving, creative way. And I think those things are really connected. And it's also about seeing the habits, seeing the things that we get caught in, the loops we get caught in. And I guess showing ourselves enough love to step out of those things. The fact of the matter is we engage in these habits out of comfort. At some point in our lives, we felt some sort of suffering or pain that caused us to create these habits to protect ourselves. But I think we're also all kind of aware on a certain level that these habits make us kind of miserable. And so it's, in some ways, it can be a tough challenge because we have to figure out, okay, well, I built this armor around myself to protect myself. And if I take off this armor, and this armor is making me miserable, even though it was built to protect myself, it's making me miserable. But if I take off this armor, what is going to protect me then? And honestly, I think that's one of the most fundamental spiritual questions we have to answer in this life. But it's also the reason to embark on an amazing adventure. So anyway, thank you again, all of you who have joined me on this journey with how to be an artist. I hope that this end is the beginning of something new, and that we can all create some beautiful, transformative things together. Thanks.